Okay, we're going to look at frequency graphs now. Now, when we take data from a frequency table, such as this table here, and we put it into a column graph, we get what's called a frequency column graph. So in this example, 20 households were surveyed about how many phones, including mobile phones, they owned. And the results from the table. So this 2 here means that there were 2 households with no phones. This 7 here means there were 7 households with 1 phone. And this 8 here means there are 8 households with 2 phones, and so on. So putting that into a column graph, you can see below the frequency goes on the vertical axis and the number of phones on the horizontal axis. You should also notice that the columns are the same width. So in this case, maybe 2 squares wide, 2 squares, 2 squares, 2 squares. Each column is 2 squares wide. And also, each column is the same distance apart. Okay, so the columns can either be not touching, or here's another example over here, the columns can be touching. So both of these graphs are correct. Whichever one you choose, make sure each column that you draw is the same width as all the other columns. Okay. The other thing to notice is that the numbers that we write are in the center of the column. Okay. Got to be in the center. Alrighty. Now, this is the example that we did in class. So I'll just switch back to the original document. Here it is. So we started off with this. So we had a frequency of 2 with a dice number of 1. Okay, so for this particular example, we have the dice number in the first column and the frequency in the second. So putting all the frequencies on the vertical axis, dice number of 1 goes up to a frequency of 2. And the next, a dice number of 2 goes up to a frequency of 7, as you can see. All right. Now you can draw the columns apart, like I've done here, or as in this completed example. Actually, yeah, I've done it here as well. This is what it looks like completed. So all the columns are the same width apart, the columns are the same width, and the numbers are centered in the column. Okay, and you can see I've labeled both axes, frequency and dice number. Okay, now switching back to our document here. So that's, hopefully you've completed that, as I just showed you. Now we're looking at frequency graphs now for grouped discrete data. Okay, so grouped data is data we put into groups. So here's one group, the 0 to 9 group. Okay, and discrete data, if you remember, is data that you can count, such as number of cars or number of people. Okay, so if we look at the data here, the ages of the patients at a medical centre in one afternoon were recorded. Sort them into the frequency table below and display the data as a frequency column graph. Okay, so we've done these tables before, so all of that data here is put into the frequency table. So we know from this table here, there are 8 ages from 0 to 9 inclusive. So you could go through and count them if you wanted to. So obviously there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there's 7, and then there's 8. So that's the first one done. Okay, the rest of the table's been done for you. Now taking all of those numbers and putting them into a frequency column graph, let's have a look. Now frequency goes on the vertical axis, as you can see. All right, there's my frequency on the vertical axis. And the ages of the people on the horizontal axis. Now have a look. I've got columns again. The columns are the same width and also the same distance apart, so they can either not touch or the columns can touch like that. So both are correct. Again, notice that the scores are in the center of the column. Okay, so for group discrete data, this is what you'll see. All right, so 0 to 9 is labeled in the center. 10 to 19 labeled in the center. All right, so same idea as before, except we have a different label. Before we had one number, now we've got a group, 0 to 9. The next group is 10 to 19. Okay. Now, let's have a look at another one. All right. Now, sometimes the frequency graph for group data displays the class centers. Okay, now we've done class centers before. Okay, if you remember 0 to 9, to get the class center of 4.5, okay, just to show you the working out, it'd be 0 plus 9 all divided by 2, which is 4.5. Yep. And to get 14.5, you would go 10 plus 19, which is 29, and then divide by 2 is 14.5. So now this graph here is the same as this graph here. Okay, the difference is you'll notice that the class centers here. So here's a class center of 4.5. We put the class centers in the middle of the column. On the previous graph, we put 0 to 9 there instead, but you can actually put the class centers there instead. Okay, so you can see that there, 14.5 is there, and that number is written in the middle of the column. 24.5 is here, that's written in the middle of the column, and so on. Okay, so this example here is showing that the class centers can be put in the middle of the column, or you can put the class intervals there instead, as we did on the previous page, as you can see here. Okay. All right, so now it's your turn. So you're going to draw the grouped discrete data example here onto the graph. Okay, so here we've got the number of pens in a pencil case. So there were 2 pencil cases with 1 to 5 pens in there. There were 7 pencil cases with 6 to 10 pens, and so on. So let's start off with labeling the axis. So frequency always goes on the vertical axis. So I can put down FREQ. And here we've got number of pens. So we'll just put down pens. Okay. Now the first column we're going to draw is 2 squares wide. And we also have to put a scale on the column. Now 2 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the last one is 10. And now the first one we have a frequency of 2 with a class interval of 1 to 5. So let's draw that on there. And I'll just get my line tool here. Should just use a rectangle tool, that could be easier. Okay, all right. So we're going to start here. It's going to be 2 squares wide, and I'm going to go up to a frequency of 2. That's my first one done. Okay, and then I'm going to label the middle of that column with this label, 1, 2, 5. Now the next one I'm going to draw is got a frequency of 7, so I'm going to draw them as touching in this case. Okay, so I'll start here. If they're touching, it goes up to, oops, I should have done a blue one there, so just change the color again. Checks, and then just keep the same color. All right. So I'm going to go up to 7. The 7 is all the way up here. I'm going to make it 2 squares wide again. Okay, and we're going to label that, and that'll be 6 to 10. Okay. Now the other option is you could choose to have gaps between your columns, but if you do that, have the same gap. So you might say, look, I'm going to put that one here instead. Okay, but then you'd have to make sure 6 to 10 is in the middle. I'm going to draw mine as touching, just for variety. Now we'll do one more. So the next one is got a frequency of 10, and let's just grab the rectangle tool. So you're going to use your rulers, obviously, to do this. So we're going to go up to 10, which is all the way up to the top there. It's going to be 2 squares wide. Okay, and now it's getting quite squashy here, isn't it? So you might want to write the numbers sideways. It is getting quite squashy. Now, if it is getting squashy, you could do the option of putting the class centers there instead, but let's just put this in here. It's going to be 11 to 15. Okay, that's not looking too good. But look at the finished product. Let's have a look. Finished product is down here. Here we go. I managed to squeeze those numbers in. Okay. So try and write small. And then you can fit those numbers in there. So that's the finished product there. So complete that graph. You can pause the video if you like, and then let's move on. So if you had another go at these numbers, I guess if you use pencil, you'll be able to try and write these a bit smaller. So 1 to 5. 6 to 10. 11 to 15. Yeah, it's a bit tricky there. So try and squeeze those in. All right. Now let's have a look at something called grouped continuous data. So this is group data again, but it's continuous data. Continuous data involves a measurement such as height, weight, speed, that sort of thing. So the frequency graph below displays the frequency distribution of the heights in centimeters of a sample of 42 people with class intervals of width 5 centimeters. So we know that from this table there are 3 people from 155 up to, but not including 160 centimeters tall. There are 2 people who are from 160 up to less than 165 centimeters tall. So remember that the 160 is not included in the first group, but it is included in the second group. Now, how do you draw these? Same sort of way. You've got frequency on the vertical axis again. The difference here is that the boundaries of the group actually have to go on the edges of the column. So previously we did something like this, 155 to 160, okay? But we're not doing that like that. We are putting 155 on the edge of the first column and then 160 at the edge of the also at the edge of the first column if you like, but the ones at the beginning, ones at the end. Okay, so each number is on the boundary of a column. Okay, we are not doing this. We're not putting a number in the middle and writing 185 to 190. We're not doing that. Okay, so that's the difference with these ones. Okay, now a frequency column graph involving grouped continuous data is called a histogram. And with these types of graphs, because it's continuous data, you can see there is a common boundary there for each class. there can be no gaps between the columns. So you don't actually have a choice with this graph. The columns have to touch. Okay. Now there are certain rules for drawing this as well, besides the columns touching. One of the rules is the first column starts half a column width from the left. So you can see here there's a little gap. All right. So if our first column was 2 centimeters wide, then that gap before the first column would be 1 centimeter. If our column was 1 centimeter wide, then that gap before the first column would be half a centimeter. So the first column starts half a column width from the left. Okay. The other rules are that there are no gaps. Okay, no gaps for the group continuous data. Now this graph is called a histogram or a frequency histogram. And each column has the class boundaries at the beginning and end of the columns. Okay, so you can see that there. 155 is at the beginning and 160 is at the end of the column. Okay. Now, the other thing to mention is that because it's continuous data, these numbers actually represent a continuous scale. Okay. All right, so let's have a look. You're going to do your first one here. So we're going to label the vertical axis with frequency again. Here we go. I'm going to put some numbers. We're going to go up to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can go up to 10 if you want. No need to. Okay, now that's frequency. And we're going to put, doesn't really say what it is. It just says, we'll put centimeters. That'll be good enough. Now, the first column, I'm going to do it 2 squares wide and with a frequency of 3. Now, remember, the first column has to start half a column width in. So if I'm going to do 2 squares wide, I have to start 1 square in. So I'm going to start right here. Okay, and that's going to go up to a frequency of 3. That'll do, just that. Now, the numbers. The numbers go on the boundaries of the column. So the first number is 170. And the next number is 175. Okay. Now, drawing up the next one, we're going to go up to a frequency of 8. Oops, wrong color. Let's switch it over again. Okay. So we're going to go frequency of 8. There we go. Good. All right, so that's now we put the next number on there, on the edge of that boundary of the next column. So that's going to be 180 there. 180. All right, now you continue that, and the finished product should look something like this. If I scroll down, this is what it should look like. Okay, now don't worry about the green line yet, but you're just looking at the columns. So that green line there we will put on later. Okay, that green line is called a frequency polygon, but you're just drawing the columns. Okay. Okay, so let's scroll back to where we're up to, which is here. So you just got to complete that graph now, make sure it looks like the one I just showed you. Okay, now here comes the frequency polygon. Now, actually, for the frequency polygon, I'm going to have to complete this graph a little bit. So that means I'll just grab this, and we have to go up to 5 next, don't we? So we'll just go up to 5 here. So we go up to 5. There we go. And the next one goes up to 2. So let's grab that. this up to 2 then. Notice my columns are the same width. And then the last one also goes up to 2. Okay, so there we go. All right. Now, don't forget you've got to put numbers on that. So that it's going to be 185. I'll just make this a bit bigger. There we go. This will be 190. And last one, 195. There we go. So the numbers should go on the boundaries of the column there. Okay, so we've done our histogram. Now we're going to do a special line graph called a frequency polygon. Now, the frequency polygons are drawn for grouped continuous data only. Okay, now the rules of the frequency polygon. It starts and ends half a column width from the first and last columns, tick. It's drawn by joining the midpoints of the tops of the columns of the histogram, tick. We're going to go through this, don't worry. And frequency polygons should only be used for continuous data and not for discrete data. Okay. Now, let's go through how to do this. So I'll use green and let's change the thickness so that's good enough. And we're going to use the line tool. Okay. So first thing you've got to do is we're going to start half a column width away. So this is 2 squares wide. So half of the first column is 1 square. So I'm going to start 1 square away. And I'm going to join the middle. I'm going to draw the first line to the middle of the first column. So you can see that there. Then I'm going to start from the middle of that first column. I'm going to draw it to the middle of the next column, right there, middle top. There we go. And then for the next bit, we're going to start from the middle of that column there and come down to the middle of the next column. Okay. And then I'll go from the middle of that column to the middle of the next column. And then, now you notice we've actually got to go across here. So the next bit is horizontal because I've got to go to the middle of the next column. Okay, that should be roughly horizontal with the way I've drawn it's not quite. And then, last of all, the middle of that column. Now we've got to finish 1 square away or half a column width away from the last column. So now if we've done it correctly, this gap here, just there, that should be 1 square wide, and this gap here should be 1 square wide. Okay, so you begin half a column width away and you finish half a column width away, and you're joining the midpoints of the tops of each column. Okay, so you're joining the midpoints of the tops of each column. There we go, like so. So that's called a frequency polygon. I'll put a little arrow to that. That's called a frequency polygon, the green line. The column graph itself is called a frequency histogram. Okay. All right. Now, here's another example of one. You can see here it's joining the midpoints of the tops of each column. It begins half a column width away and it finishes half a column width away. So the frequency polygon is a line graph drawn on top of the frequency histogram. Here's another example. Here's another polygon. You can see it's joining the middle of the top of each column and it finishes half a column width away and begins half a column width away. Now, in some cases, you will see the frequency polygon drawn without the histogram. So you can see that here. All I've done here is delete the columns and I've just left the frequency polygon there. Okay, so sometimes you'll see that. Now, what is a frequency polygon useful for? All right, just it looks a bit like decoration, but actually, the frequency polygon gives the data shape. So here we would say that this data set is approximately symmetrical because the graph is approximately symmetrical. Okay, not quite, but it's approximately symmetrical. Okay. The other reason we have frequency polygons is because you can compare two data sets. So if you look at, let me just make this a bit thicker. So here's one data set, goes this way. Whoops, there we go. So you can see the red data set that I've graphed. That's one frequency polygon. Now there's a second frequency polygon with a dashed line there. So I can draw two frequency polygons on the same axis, and then I can compare the shape of the data sets, for example, by comparing the frequency polygons. Now it's your turn. So you've got to draw a frequency polygon on top of this graph. Okay, so let's make sure you get it right. So you're going to put a dot in the middle of each column. So let's put a little dot there. Put a dot in the middle of each column. Now, put a dot in the middle of here. That's got a 0 frequency. I'm going to put a dot there. Okay, and then let's put a dot. We've got to begin half a column width away. So I've got 1, 2, 3. Each column is 5 grids wide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to start 2.5 grids away. 1, 2. Here will do. So I'm going to start just there, and I'm going to finish 2.5 grids away. 1, 2, here. Okay. Now I've got all the dots lined up. You just have to get a ruler and join them up. So let's do that. So do green again. So let's have a look. So starting from here. Whoops, missed that one. Here we go, there's the first one. And then here's the next one. And then here's the next one. And then here's the next one. Whoops, missed that one. They should join up. So might not undo that. Okay. So we're going to start just here. There we go. And all the way down. There we go. And then from there to the middle of the next one. And then last of all, there we go. So there's my frequency polygon for that frequency histogram. Okay, now once you've done all that, you can go on to these questions. Okay, now these are all on Google Classroom. Okay, both of these, 1 and 2.